Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much to Datuk Chan for organising this event and inviting me, and to John Beaufoys, who suggested the book in the first place and showed amazing patience over the years as it slowly developed. And we got there. And to Rosemary Wilkinson, who made sure that the project kept going to the end, which has now happened. So nice to see everybody. I thought just before I started on the actual butterflies, I'd just say a very few words about my connections to Borneo and my connection to butterflies. So first, my connection to Borneo is I first came out to Borneo in the 1970s. My husband was born in Sandakan, and most of his family was still living here then, including Anthea. Do I need a microphone? You see. Yes, that's fine. Yeah. Okay. Yes, that's fine. That's fine. Okay. So I do. Okay, can I just switch this on? Yeah, that's fine.
Check.
Okay, so I have this in this hand and this in this hand. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. No, there's nowhere to put that. Okay.
Just use this.
No, it's okay. No, it's okay. Thank you for offering. I'll take this. So, sorry about that, everybody. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes.
Everybody okay? Right. Okay. Right. Thank you for suggesting it. So yes, I first came out to Borneo in the 1970s, and my husband was born in Sandakan, and most of the family was still living here at that time. So we used to come out every year and spend about a month here, and spent most of our time traveling around. And as most of you know, the Phillips family very into the wildlife, so the focus was definitely on the wildlife. And but we did some of the usual things as well, and this is a picture of us at the top of Kinabalu. On the extreme left is Anthea, and next to her, that's me. And then Fuilan, Ansao, and Helen, I remember. Yeah. Fui Eng. What, Helen? Oh, it wasn't Helen. Okay, Fui Eng. Okay. And this is Danam Valley around the same time. And these are just a few old photos I came across recently. They're not a particularly good selection, but this is Danam Valley, the access road to Danam Valley, and this is before BRL was built. So we actually went and stayed at the rangers, at the rangers station. So here we are. What are we admiring so much? This is Charles and Quentin's older brother and me, and we're looking at some nice elephant dung because they were very keen to see elephants, but we didn't. But this is as close as we got to the elephants, and they were very excited. I was told to look pleased, so I thought. And yeah, so we've been coming out ever since and spending at least a month here every year. And as you know, Quentin's been very involved with the birds in particular, and indeed for a long time I was mainly a birder, and we did a lot of birding. We used to stay with Anthea up at the park where she was stationed in those days, and but that's all history, but that is the history of my connection to Borneo, and we still come out every year and travel as much as we can. Now as to my connection to butterflies, as John rightly mentioned, I've had an interest in butterflies for a long time, but about 15 years ago I decided to do a personal project in our own garden, and that was to encourage as many butterflies to visit as possible by planting the caterpillar food plants, which is quite a speciality because not most people think of butterflies like associated with the nectar flowers, the beautiful flowers that they will settle on, but the larval food plants aren't always so beautiful, but they are absolutely essential to the butterfly's life cycle. So we live in London, home to 10 million people, no less, and you can see it's pretty congested, but this is just a tiny, tiny fragment of London, and we live in this area about here. And right, so we started, this is our garden, and the nearest plants are all nectar plants for the butterflies, and moving up the garden, another bed of nectar plants. But most importantly, something that not many people do is we have every plant you can see here is a larval food plant of butterflies. So the long grass here, this supports 6 different species of butterflies. The nettle bed here, which, as John rightly said, most people would be digging out of their garden, supports another 4 species, the very colourful species, actually, and the ivy on the back wall supports another species and a very colourful moth as well as being very good for nesting birds. So we've really dedicated our garden to wildlife, particularly in the last 15 years, and particularly to butterflies. And this is one of the butterflies that breeds in our garden nearly every year. So I'm pleased to say the project has been quite successful. And so those are the connections, the Borneo and butterflies. Then, as John rightly said, I began to switch my attention, or I started focusing more on the butterflies in Borneo when we were out here, though I still love birding, I must admit. And this was the result. And I'd like to just thank Cosmo very much, who came with us on many of our field trips and took a lot of the photographs himself. So he and I mainly did the photos in the book. Quentin helped in lots of other ways. And now to start on the core of the talk, right? This is a map of Sunderland, or where Borneo sits in Sunderland, right? And the Sunderland is this green line here. This marks the edge of Sunderland. What's the importance of Sunderland? That once the Malay Peninsula, Sumatra, Java and Borneo were all part of one, and Palawan, which is of course politically part of the Philippines, were all part of one landmass and so shared the same fauna, including butterflies. So that's why we have so many species in common with say, the Malay Peninsula. These are some of the sites we visited in our travels. It's not an exhaustive list. There are other places with lots of butterflies. In fact, you'll find butterflies everywhere once you start looking, and I urge you to look. Just keep your eyes open. The butterflies are there, and they're stunning. But there's not all the sites are on here, unfortunately. The ones in Sarawak, where we travelled here and here, weren't on. But that gives you some idea. We went as far around as much as we could to experience the different sites. And there are other sites like Tawa and Kinabatangan, which are also very rich in butterflies. And they're not been featured here. Right, this might look a bit technical, but it's not at all. It's just a simple list, really, of how many butterflies you would get in different countries. And Borneo is very lucky in being very rich in butterfly species. So you can see how many more, nearly 1,000 butterflies recorded in Borneo, 1,000 species of butterfly. So more than the whole of North America and the whole of India and the whole of Europe. And you can see UK has an unbelievably small number of 59 species. But we struggle, but they're still beautiful and they must all be appreciated, is what I feel. So, and butterflies are divided by scientists into families. So these are the scientific families, and the book follows these, which is important for you to grasp the characteristics of different families. It's the best way to get into the butterflies, and or indeed any type of fauna. But here we are with so the on the left here, the Papilionidae, known as the birdwings and swallowtails, and then the Pieridae, the whites and yellows, and the Nymphalidae, which tend to be very colourful. And a lot of them are the ones that have the eye spots on, which are very catching, attention catching. These are the ones that most people are going to pick up on when they're travelling, and they will see them and they will think, I wonder what that is. Now, there are a lot of Lycaenidae, which are the small blues, and the Hesperidae, the small brown jobs, if you like, but they're of course lovely, and they also have interesting stories of their own, but they're not really very easy to separate in the field, to work out what's going on. So the book has concentrated on the Papilionidae, Pieridae, and Nymphalidae, but not exclusively, so that everything gets a mention. And right, this talk is actually going to look, although the book is organised by family, which is definitely the right way to look at the butterflies, the talk is going to look at butterflies in different habitats, and we're starting number one with the montane butterflies. Obviously, this is Kinabalu, and here you can see the telecom tower, which is at about 2,000 meters, is the limit of butterfly breeding butterflies, is at around that level. Obviously, butterflies are dependent on vegetation mainly, and so higher up you're going to get less and less, and eventually it peters out at that level. Up here the vegetation is different from the lowlands, clearly, and here we have like the tree ferns and so on. And our first Bornean butterfly, hooray, Whitehead's Baron. This is the female. The male is smaller, darker, and more angular. And here you will just see there's a nick out of his wing, which her wing rather, but which could well be due to predator attack. You will see the row of spots along the edge here is a sort of decoy so that predators will attack the back of the wing, and rather than the head. Most predators go in all sorts of fauna and in all sorts of animal life will go for the head of their victim, but if they take a bit out of the wing, the butterfly can still survive. So that's one interesting. You also see it's just resting on a wooden walkway, and that's probably quite warm, and the montane butterflies do need to warm up in the sunshine and also rest on things like the wooden or rocks or other things. And here, another example. This is the Kinabalu bush orange, which is a close relative of the lowland, the common bush orange, and it gets its name, marginata, after its entire dark margin, which is its unusual feature, again resting on a warm surface to pick up the maximum heat in the cold environment on the mountain. One of a large group of black butterflies, which are black with white horizontal stripes on. This is distinguished by only having one stripe on the forewing, this one. And why is it called the orange staff sergeant? Because the female is actually very different. She is orange stripes on a brown background, so it looks completely different. Again, resting on a nice warm rock there, I think, in the sunshine. And what's this interesting butterfly? Somebody said? No. Okay, actually it's not a butterfly at all. It's a moth, but still very beautiful, very interesting. And that's why I have included a handful of moths in the book, because I think they are also really underestimated. They're so interesting. And there are even more moths than butterflies. There are almost 10,000 moths in Borneo. So not going there anytime soon, I think. But so people often ask themselves, what's the distinction between a moth and a butterfly? And the typical answers are, butterflies day flying, brightly coloured, moths dull and nighttime flying. But here we have got a bright daytime flying moth. So no, that won't work at all. So the only accurate distinguishing feature is the antennae. And I apologise, this isn't a particularly good picture of the antennae, but we'll see more throughout the talk. But so butterflies always have a club tip to their antennae, and moths don't. The most typical form of a moth antennae would be either feathered, strongly feathered, or tapering to a fine point, which this one is, right? Up here, you can see just very thin, like they sometimes call thread-like. Anyway, so this is a day-flying moth, and very stunning too. That is actually also in the book. And then, right, our next habitat is hill forest, and most of the following pictures were taken at Poring at about the 600-meter mark, height, altitude. And here is our first birdwing, the common birdwing. There are 4 yellow and black birdwings in Borneo, and they're mainly distinguished by the dark margin, the shape and extent of that margin, and also by the further black markings. But also be aware that in the birdwings, the male and female are often very different. I mean, like the female is more of a darker, messier version of the male. So we'll often have more dark. For example, in this species, this is the female, and the male will only have one spot here instead of this row. So you've got to distinguish first which species you're in, and then male and female. The striped ringlet is a very distinctive pattern, unique. So I think if you see this, you'll have no trouble in knowing what you've got. But as well as the obvious pattern, look for the little orange patch towards the end of the antennae. This is a butterfly of damp, shady places like along streams and so on. And this is another butterfly of damp, shady places. And you can see in this photo, the butterfly is sucking up moisture from the damp rocks here. And you can see how damp they are with all this green on, this moss and so on. And now this is it. The pattern here is interesting because it can serve 2 purposes. From a distance, because of the butterfly's natural habitat in the sort of shade at the edge of the forest, at the edge of the tree line, often sits in dappled shade, and the black and white there can act as a disruptive pattern. So you can't make out the shape of a butterfly as such, like this is predators can't see that you've got a butterfly there. They just see dark and light, and they're not quite sure what they're looking at. But if you are close, at close proximity, the black and white just act as warning colours. So the traditional warning colours in butterflies are black and white, and indeed in the whole animal kingdom, black and white, yellow and black, red and black, orange and black, signify that the butterfly is potentially is distasteful to predators. Another hill forest butterfly, the big-eyed jungle lady, not only has a dramatic pattern, but is very interesting in that it's one of the few genus to have a few genus from Papua to have crossed Wallace's line. I'll show you what I mean in this. Right, we're back to this, but just briefly, right? Okay, Papua is obviously just over here, and this is Wallace's line up the Makassar Strait. And generally, the fauna in these 2 regions is very different, right? So we've already talked about Sunderland. That's one area, and this is another over here. But usually the spread of species across that line is from here, from west to east. And unusually, the jungle lady species has crossed from Papua across to us, right? It's just a technical point, but it's quite interesting. And now, okay, this is Penrisen in Sarawak, about 2 hours east of Kuching, a hill forest ridgetop path, which ends in a viewpoint where you can look out over West Kalimantan. A lovely walk, and I saw lots of forest butterflies there, and I have to say I didn't manage to capture a single photo that day. They're very quick and skittish, sort of flying off all the time. It shows there's always an element of luck in photography, as well as perseverance, of course. Our third habitat is secondary vegetation, which is frequently found along roads, narrow strips along the sides of roads where the vegetation has been disturbed. The trees have been cut down when the road was built, and then secondary vegetation has grown up there, and also perhaps abandoned plots and so on. and this is in the Cockle River Valley, about 1 hour north of KK. Some of these butterflies will be more familiar to everybody because you might see them around town. I mean, in fact, I have seen this butterfly at Tanjonaro in the last few days. Very pretty butterfly. But the first time I stopped to take a picture of this butterfly, Quentin said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm taking a picture of this butterfly." He said, "Why? You're taking a picture of the most common butterfly in Borneo. What are you doing?" I said, "Yes, but it's," he said, "everybody knows about that." But I said, "Yes, but it's new to me, and I think it's beautiful." And the moral of the story is never be afraid to enjoy even the most common things. That is a beautiful butterfly, and it's in the book. And, okay, the palm king. This is one of a handful, about half a dozen palm kings, which are all very, very large, and with these broad stripes across, so very distinctive. But all the others have a darker central stripe than this one. I'm talking about IDing them now. I mean, I'm giving some pointers on ID as well as on habitat, right, and behaviour. But ID is obviously one of the things you're all going to be thinking about when you're looking at your butterflies. And so there's several of these, but this is the most common. Most of the others all the others are forest butterflies, and this is the one that will occur in plantations and gardens and so on, where the larvae, the caterpillars, feed on palms. In this picture, it's feeding on, the adult is feeding on pineapple, overripe pineapple, which Quentin had put out as bait at the back of a cabin in Tabin, and pineapple is a very good bait because it's got a very strong smell, carries well, and attracts butterflies quickly. So in flew the palm king, very beautiful specimen, and a couple of other butterflies as well, I think. But so to that extent it was successful, but you can see it was very quickly covered with ants. So this sort of baiting is a very short-term idea. It's not, you're not going to want to keep that for long because you're going to get everything else as well as the butterflies on it. But it's one way of attracting butterflies nearer to you. Okay, the common sailor is the most common of this large group of black and white butterflies, and they're usually distinguished by, now talking ID again, the thickness of of their forewing band, and also the breadth of the gap between that and the end tip, and the number of spots here. So sometimes with butterflies, it's really down to that tiny detail, and you have to be very observant, and you might have to count spots, yes, so, to get your ID right. This has got the typically rounded hindwing and sharply angled forewing of the albatross species. All have that, of the males, and in that group. But this butterfly has an interesting story. When Otsuka published his, a Japanese gentleman called Kazuhisa Otsuka published a very comprehensive book on the butterflies of Borneo in 1988, and it's a really fabulous piece of work. But he did not include this, and he included everything else. One can only assume it was not really seen around at that time, and yet, so that was 1988, and yet by 2010, I would say it was pretty much everywhere. It was quite common. So we're talking a very rapid spread. In about 20 years, it had really swept across Borneo, and I've seen it in about 6 different places, in secondary vegetation. And that very rapid expansion exactly follows the rapid expansion in the Malay Peninsula just prior to the 1960s, where it was not seen at first, and then suddenly, once it took hold, it just spread. So it's quite an interesting sort of history, and it's now everywhere in Borneo. But this is the female, and you can see very different from the male. Well, not very, quite different from the male. Much softer colouring, and much more rounded wings, and she's more secretive. She's shyer. and this is often the case in butterflies, there'll be a superficial resemblance between male and female, but the female will often be more subtly coloured, more dully coloured, and she'll be more secretive. That brings us to our next habitat, which is forest rivers, and this is a very rich habitat for butterflies. Because butterflies use the rivers as flyways, because there's no obstacles. They can fly rapidly up over the water, up the river, move around quickly and easily, and also because there's a lot of flowering bushes at the edges, in the sunshine, at the edges of rivers, of forest rivers, where in the jungle there wouldn't be so many flowering plants, certainly not low down. There might be a few up at the top in the canopy, but so this is attractive to butterflies, a clear pathway and flowers for nectar. And we see a lot of butterflies here. This has a lot of graphiums. A lot of graphiums occur along rivers, and here you can see them. These butterflies are what they call puddling, but they're drinking water from the sandy shoreline of the river. And butterflies are seeking. They choose particularly sites which have been enriched with animal urine, such as pigs or macaques that come down to the river to drink and urinate. And then the butterfly. Why the butterflies seek the rich waters? Because the males, it's males do this, not the females. The males need salts to improve their fertility, and they cannot get salts from plants. Plants don't contain the salts, so they excuse me. So they seek salts from animals' secretions, including urine, sweat, and in some cases the teardrops of larger animals, larger mammals. And in this case, where they're finding them on the ground. And here's another puddle. But when butterflies get together to do this, it's called a puddle. And in this one, you can see that the previous one was mainly graphiums, and this is mainly pierrids. And this is, in fact, these are all the same species in here. This is called the orange gull, and you might think, well, that's not really orange. At least I did when I first read about it. It's yellow, basically, but it's called the orange gull after the bright orange patch, which only shows when it flies off. So although you can see a hint of orange, perhaps just a very hint shining through here in these butterflies. And so here's our orange gull with a few graphiums on the left. But can anybody see another species in this photo? Okay. Yes. Okay, do you think somewhere over here? You think, yes. So here we have one hiding in plain sight, as it were. This is the Bornean gull, which is an endemic. And my tip on this would be, when you see a group of butterflies, check each individual if you're keen, to find what you're looking at. I mean, don't just assume these are all the same, but don't assume, and that one's the same. And what's the difference here? It's quite subtle, really. So they're obviously very closely related. This is the common one. This is the rare endemic. And the difference is just in the more white in the margin, and this is quite dark. And what's in the margin, if any, is mainly yellow flecks, but it's a much darker margin. And they superficially look quite the same. So always check out. You will see a lot of butterflies in a puddling group, which is great, because you'll start, once you find a group, you'll see it on the sand ahead of you, and you'll see a good group, and then others will join that group. If you wait long enough, other species will fly in. And so my tip is, if you can, find a comfortable place to sit down, because if you're going to be there for a while and you want to be still, if you're standing and you're moving around, every time you move, or if you're you'll send the group up, and you won't get to see what they are, and you won't get photographs. But if you can find a comfortable seat nearby, it's worth it, and stay there and watch what comes and goes. It's quite exciting, you know. You're watching, and suddenly you're watching some amazing butterflies, and suddenly something even more amazing flies in, and you just thought, oh, when will this end? Never. So, okay, this butterfly is puddling on its own, as it were. This is one of 2 dragon tails in Borneo. The other one, and they're mainly distinguished by this transparent patch in the wing, right? So in the green dragon tail, it's a bigger patch there, but it's a very subtle difference. You really have to be sure what you're doing. You know, take a good look. And the other thing is the colour of the colouring of the pale areas, which this is the white dragon tail, it's sort of creamy underneath, and in the other it's got a slight greenish tinge, and it's the green dragon tail. This is an interesting butterfly for other reasons. I think it's very small, and with its small size, its stubby wings, and these long tails, which it holds rigid behind it. They're not floppy, they don't trail, they don't flutter. It holds them rigid. And it's got a very strange darting flight. You know, it moves around quite suddenly. It really looks like very like a dragonfly, and I suspect that gives this butterfly certain protection, because a dragonfly would be less palatable than a butterfly. So it's mimicking the dragonfly for its own protection, right? So, and the other thing in this photo that's quite interesting is you can see that this particular individual is squirting water out of its rear end, and when butterflies are puddling, because there's only a small amount of salt or other trace elements in the water it's taking in, to get the right amount of the salts, it has to drink an awful lot of water, and it will get very bloated, so it's constantly ejecting water at the other end, so it doesn't get too waterlogged. Some butterflies don't puddle on the bank. They actually stand in the shallows of the stream to take water. And here you can see, to drink water, and here you can see the squared yellow. But I'm sure you've also noticed the other butterflies in this picture. Yes? Yes? Right, we can see them here. Not one, but 2. And they are, anybody? Anybody know? Okay, they are, surprisingly, the great orange tip. I mean, so here we're having a quick look at this, a proper look at the squared yellow, which is bigger than all the other yellows. That's one of the ways of distinguishing it. Oh, and the other one that was in the stream is the great orange tip. And in my experience, this is featured a lot in both in specimen collections and also in artwork, this beautiful butterfly. But what you're really, that's quite deceptive in a way, because what you're, so here in the drawing, but what you're actually going to see in the field is this, which is obviously very, very different. So you've got to keep your eye, get your eye in for that. So using camouflage very well there. Okay, even in bigger habitats, some butterflies have a micro-habitat niche, if you like. So this is found along forest rivers, this butterfly, the autumn leaf, but it actually prefers dry gullies. And here it is sunning itself on the rocks in a dry gully just leading down to the river. And it's not found along the shore in the same way as the other ones that we've just looked at. Now this, I think, is a useful picture, because as well as showing the underside of the butterfly, the underwing, it's also showing here, it's just you've got a glimpse of the top side, which is obviously very different. You can see the bright orange there and the black at the apex, at the tip. And that will be very helpful in identifying. So butterflies are quite hard work because you've got overwing, underwing, you've got male, female, you've got a lot going on. You know, you really need to be sharp. And this butterfly, I'd been hoping to see this for many, many years. And everyone else seemed to see it, but I did not. So I was very pleased one day when it shot out of the forest and landed on me, I must say. It came to see me instead of me going to see it. And the reason it came to me was because it was seeking sweat, right? It wanted to. Now, I had definitely been, you know, I was definitely pretty sweaty that day, as most days. So so it's landed on me, but you can see it's here. See its proboscis landing, it's on my skin, and it's curled around there, just sucking up the sweat. But actually, you can see a drop of moisture there. In fact, I'd probably dried out quite a bit, so the sweat on my skin was probably quite dry, so there was salt on my skin, and it was actually butterflies, if they want to, they can only take up fluid, but if they want to, they can regurgitate a bit of saliva and sort of rehydrate what they want to. So that's actually what it's doing. It's just, anyway, it's taking up the sweat off the surface of my skin. And of course, I couldn't take this photo, so Quentin took it for me, as it were, of my long-sought butterfly. Now, the next habitat is the river floodplain forest, and this is at Mulu, which has a very rich soil, and as a consequence, a rich, varied vegetation, and as a consequence of the vegetation, a rich, varied fauna, including butterflies. So, this, I would not say, is the blue-spotted peacock is not necessarily a butterfly of the forest, but it can be found wherever its larval food plant grows, and that is its caterpillars or larvae like to entirely feed on citrus plants. So it could also be found in gardens where anybody's growing, you know, pomelos, oranges, whatever, in the citrus family. So it's quite, and this actually was taken just outside Mulu Park. But so it's forest or village, if you like, forest or garden. Okay, once again, how many butterflies can you see in this photo? Okay, we're saying one or two, one, two. Any more? Two. Yes, two is right. Here is the main, if you like, portrait of the main focus of this photograph, and just here at an odd angle, but is a companion butterfly of a different species. See, this is its underwing, which is a subtle shade of sort of greeny blue, and incidentally just almost exactly matches the underside of this leaf here. And this one, of course, just blends very well with all the brown leaves. And they are feeding on an overripe banana, which Quentin had put out. Again, you can see he's the man who likes to bait the butterflies. I'm an absolute purist. I just follow the butterflies around. I never try and manipulate them. But this worked, obviously. So Quentin had put out a overripe banana, and we were staying at Mulu in a cabin at the edge of the forest, and almost immediately a couple of butterflies flew out of the forest and started flying round and round just above the banana. But I could see that they just weren't happy. They just weren't settling, so I thought it's the environment. They're not ready for this. So I went and gathered a whole load of fallen leaves just from a few yards away and brought them back and made a sort of simulated forest floor, where they immediately settled and started noshing away on the banana. So they did need that reassurance that they were going to be camouflaged when they landed. Butterflies know where to land. They know what surfaces they're hidden on. it wouldn't be any good otherwise, being camouflaged if you couldn't recognize where to go. So they were happy after that. Sorry, I haven't been using this properly. I hope everybody can hear me. Drat. Okay, onwards. Okay, and that's the one on the right that had the pale blue underside, and now later in the day it was still on the banana. It opens its wings, and you can see it's very well camouflaged in amongst the leaves. All right, this has got quite an interesting story. Right, we're still at Mulu here. There are wild butterflies growing along the wooden walkway, along the edge of the raised walkway, and here is the banana flower head, and each day a bract will open or fall back, and revealing the long, thin, nectar-filled corollas. Usually, wild bananas are pollinated by spider hunters that sit on the top of the flower here and reach down with their long, thin, curved beaks and bills and take the nectar from in here. And they pollinate the flowers because the pollen is brushed off on their face at the base of the bill, and then when they go to the next flower, they take the pollen with them. But in this instance, this banana flower is being visited by this skipper, right? So we're now with the Hesperidae, the little brown ones, and of which there are many, many species. And you can see, I don't know how sharp this photo is, but you can see that very, very long proboscis. They're going right up in an enormous loop and down. Imagine the skill of that's like sort of having a hose pipe for a nose and sort of getting it up over here and down into the flower. And that does not come into contact with the pollen. So the Hesperidae are often known as nectar robbers because they take the nectar, but they don't service the plant by pollinating it, cross-pollinating it. And I think in this case, the true pollinators were these little stingless forest bees. You can see one here just buzzing around, which I watched crawling in and out of the corollas of these plants along the walkway. And they crawled in and went down to get the nectar, and when they crawled out, they were definitely covered in pollen. So I think they might have been the pollinators in this case. Right, the next habitat is the seasonally dry lowland forest, and most of these photos were taken at Sungai Wain in Kalimantan, East Kalimantan. Now, butterflies in this forest are typically brown, shades of brown. Where's CK? CK, shades of brown, CK, sorry, shades of brown. So I think that's a very beautiful butterfly. That's the female. She's a bit bigger than the male. And but they are nonetheless all brown. But the jungle glories have got a surprise in store for you, because when they take off, they flash iridescent blue overwings. Their wings are, and as they fly away, with each wing flap, you see the blue and then it disappears and you see it again. And it's like a light flashing on and off in the forest. And I waited and waited for that shot, but I never got the butterfly overwing, just her just sitting there. Very beautiful, I must say. And this very similar sort of shades of brown again, but a different butterfly in a different genus, and quite a bit smaller. And this one, the yellow band, notice these particularly long antennae. But yeah, so, and next, the Yutang resident, which is very secretive and shy and tends to stay in the darkest parts of the forest. And in those light conditions, this enormous eye spot really does look like the eye of a much larger animal. So that's how it's protected from predation. It just looks like a beast. And then, okay, finally we're coming to the lowland dipterocarp forest, and most of these photos were taken at Sepilok. But okay, the tree nymph usually floats and glides very high in the canopy, and I'm sure most people have seen this at some point, but occasionally comes down to take nectar at a flowering bush. So we were lucky, and Cosmo got this amazing picture. Horsfield's Baron is one of a large group of dark butterflies with a blue rim, which are various amounts, distinguished by the various amounts of blue here, and how jagged the edges and so on, and some have got some spots in it. So it's a large group, but this is one of the most common with the clearest blue, I think. And these tend to stay low and float off over the leaves. But in this case, this one's just sunning on a low bush, sunning on a large leaf or on a low bush. And what's that? Okay, the cruiser. I'd say this is really a butterfly of forest edge and forest rivers, so not deep in the forest necessarily, but has a habit of settling on damp, bare ground, as this one is here. Sorry, just one thing I'd like to say about the cruiser. So the first time you might realize there's a cruiser near you, and if you're walking through the forest, walking up a forest stream or something, is you'll hear a loud flapping, and be aware of a butterfly coming out of the forest and flapping around your head. They have a very noisy wing beat in my experience, and it's probably a sign that it's about to land on you. So in this case, if you want to have a good look, stay very still. And I would say the butterfly is allowed to flap, but you are not. just stay still, and eventually you will be rewarded. I mean, it's happened to me more than once. It's just, and they're again they're seeking sweat. Okay, no, this is the very final habitat is offshore islands. Now, these were all taken on Maratua off Kalimantan, but I have to say from the beginning that every island, the species will differ depending on the size of the island, how far it is from the mainland, and the vegetation and previous colonization by butterfly species. But this is really just an example. Every island will be different, and that's why islands are very interesting habitats. So in this case, oh gosh. So just to remind you, here is where Maratua is, just off the coast of Kalimantan. And here we found a fair number of the mangrove tree nymph, which lives in mangrove and back mangrove habitat. Much darker you'll see than the idea butterfly we saw earlier, the more common one in the lowland forest. It's got a much darker, much more dark on the wings here. Again, normally is high up in the trees, but luckily came down to rest for a bit, so we could get a good picture. And but you'll be pleased to know you don't necessarily have to visit an offshore island to see this. I have seen this butterfly near Karambunai Beach, just north of KK, about half an hour north of KK, off the access road to the Nexus Resort. So you can see it there, where there's still quite a quantity of mangroves. Yeah. Okay, another island butterfly, the island rustic, which was probably the most common butterfly on the island, and it's very similar to the lowland mainland one, and the distinguishing feature here is going to be the edging of this pale band, so quite obscure. In the common lowland one, you've got a sort of bump here, a couple of bumps, so you're looking at tiny details to see, but you're really also looking at location. Where you see it will tell you what it most likely is. So this is the island one, and we found on Maratua it was living in colonies. I never saw it singly. It was always a kind of crowd. Whether that's common and what has induced that, I do not know. But This is the island cycad blue, and unlike the cycad, the common cycad blue, it occurs singly and does not destroy the plant it lives on. But the common cycad blue, which anybody who's grown a cycad in their garden might know, settles on, once it's taken hold of your plant, your cycad is finito, basically. I mean, it eats the middle, the young shoots, and destroys this. Well, doesn't kill the cycad, but it destroys it. It destroys all the new leaves, so it leaves it looking pretty awful, and it will come back eventually. But anyway, this little butterfly, which is smaller and paler than the lowland cycad blue, does not destroy the plant because it's living singly. That's one of the differences. And here we go. Now this is related to the Hyperlimnus bellina, the grey egg fly. This is the Malayan egg fly, a slightly more delicate looking butterfly. And this also has a very interesting life story in that it is known to stand, the female, having laid her eggs, will stay with them. I mean, actually parenting her eggs, and in this until they hatch into small larvae, and then they will disperse to other leaves. So here, the tiny yellow dots here are the last remaining eggs that haven't yet hatched, but most of them have now. The small black objects are the newly hatched larvae, and she stays standing over those until they're big enough to move off to other leaves. Because you can see they've already eaten all between the ribs here. All the flesh of the leaf has gone. So as soon as they've had a lot of that leaf, they'll move off to fresh leaves, and then she can't guard them all, but she guards them in their early stages and protects them against small ants, which otherwise would come and eat the eggs and the larvae. And that has been known to substantially improve the chance of survival, obviously. Right, okay. Okay, here we are. I think this is in Mulu, upper side river. Cosmo's just taking a picture of another butterfly that's landed on me, and this one I've got on my hand here, small Lycaenidae. So that was on one of our expeditions. Now, some people do say to me, was it difficult to get all these butterfly pictures? And I say, well, the short answer is yes. Yes, it was. But it was also really enjoyable, and it took us to all parts of Borneo that we hadn't been to before, and we met lots of lovely people and saw some amazing places and some wonderful butterflies. So it was well worth it. And if we're looking reasonably chilled in this photo, it's because we're standing in the stream up to our knees and feeling quite literally chilled. So I think, and that is the end of my talk.